This is White Plains Week, the weekly roundup of White Plains, Westchester, and world news. With John Bailey, editor and publisher of the daily internet newspaper White Plains Citizen Net Reporter, WPCNR.com. Jim Beneroff, editor and publisher of SuburbanStreet.com and WhitePlains.com. And me, Peter Katz, formerly with NBC, ABC News, and stations from Boston to Los Angeles. White Plains Week, what's happening? Who are the newsmakers? What's in store for the future? The views and opinions expressed on this program are solely those of the participants. White Plains Week is presented on Optimum Cable Channel 76, Verizon Fios Channel 45, and on the internet at whiteplainsweek.com, youtube.com, and wpcommunitymedia.org. Now, White Plains Week.
Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. White Plains, Westchester, and the world. I'm John Bailey, the Citizen Net reporter, and I'm with Peter Katz, the anchor for all seasons. My partner since 2015, I believe. No, 2007. Right. And Jim Beneroff, our other musketeer, or newsketeer, is on assignment.
The three newsketeers.
Yes,
that's
is
good.
on assignment again
Why don't you
this
write a
evening.
book by that, using that title?
The Newsketeers. I know, I've come up with lots of book titles that I never write the books for.
Of course, there was a Tom and Jerry cartoon about the Mouseketeers.
The Mouseketeers, which was a direct steal by Walt Disney over the years. But speaking, no, I wasn't going to use the ad lib I was about to do. But this was a huge news week. Peter, just run down this gobsmacking week of news.
Well, if you leave out the national stuff, locally, we have the Con Edison stuff, with Con Edison filing with the Public Service Commission for a 6% increase in electric rates, 11% in natural gas rates. They say it's going to upgrade safety and infrastructure on the natural gas side, but they will not be using the increase to help increase the supply of natural gas. County Executive George Latimer, Ben Boykin, who's the chairman of the County Board of Legislators, Tom Roach, Mayor of New Rochelle, Noam Branson, and some others, the Westchester Business Council among them, have called on Con Edison to delay its moratorium on new natural gas connections. Now, they want to stop that, and Con Edison says they're not going to have the supply to hook up new people after March 15th. Con Edison says the moratorium is firm because if they don't stop hooking up new people to the gas lines, there could be massive shutdowns of thousands because the demand is exceeding the supply. What they're not talking about is how to increase the supply. Mayor Roach says most of White Plains developments are planned already and approved, and Con Edison is going to hook them up, and so they won't be affected by the moratorium. The Public Service Commission, for its part, has approved $223 million for Con Ed to initiate geothermal improvements to Westchester housing. That means going to geothermal heat pumps and other things, and for businesses to be helped in cutting back on natural gas consumption. The Public Service Commission has scheduled a public hearing on the Con Ed moratorium policy. Now, it's going to take place next week, but we understand there may be a schedule change. Originally, they were supposed to hold a hearing in Ossining on Tuesday, then one in White Plains on Wednesday. We understand the Ossining one may be canceled on Tuesday, but keep your eye on the local media to find out for sure. If you want to have your say, let the Public Service Commission know how you feel about the Con Ed gas moratorium and Con Ed rates.
Right, and the information on the hearing protocols are on my website.
And so keep that in mind, WPCNR.com, to find out what's going to be happening with the Public Service Commission hearing. Mayor Roach is now a prime-time hit, as Citizens to be Heard is televised for the first time. This took place just before the council meeting last Monday. The State of the Union message was delivered. As you may know, it took place this past Tuesday in Washington. Trump did speak to a joint session of the House and the Senate. Supreme Court Judge Roberts votes to delay a ruling on a restrictive Louisiana abortion law. Frank Robinson, known as Robbie, a Hall of Fame slugger with the Reds and the Orioles. He had 586 home runs. First black manager in baseball, has passed away. John?
Thank you, Peter. And the first up on the White Plains Week video newsreel is a glut of reporters waiting for George Latimer. Well, it's not really a glut.
Half a glut.
Not a, well, it was all who showed up on the short notice. And the intriguing thing about this is that George Latimer had a statement on the moratorium. Peter.
Yeah, well, you know, as we're recording this program, this is Friday morning, Con Edison has not backed away from its plan to refuse new hookups to its gas lines after the middle of March. Now, a week ago Thursday, elected officials concerned with the devastating effect it could have on development and on homeowners met with Con Ed officials at Con Ed's building over in Rye. But at the same time, Con Ed asked the Public Service Commission for the rate increase, which we mentioned in the headlines. Now, this past Monday morning, the County Executive Latimer held a news conference at his White Plains office. And first, you'll see Latimer, then White Plains Mayor Tom Roach, then New Rochelle Mayor Noam Branson, and finally, the chairman of the County Board of Legislators, Ben Boykin.
This moratorium is a serious move that will impact development in Westchester County, and not just the county-sponsored programs where we have IDA support for different projects, but specifically what will happen in each of the towns and cities and villages, and particularly our major cities, where development has been very much a part of the lifeline of their economic revival efforts. You see that economic revival in New Rochelle, you see it in White Plains, you see it in Yonkers, and a moratorium of no new hookups would create a very chilling effect on that.
It was a shock, but as we have learned more, we think that the impact on existing projects, at least in White Plains, is not going to be great. But I do think this is a wake-up call, and I pretty quickly came over to the idea that this is an opportunity to accelerate the transition to renewables, which is where we're headed anyway. And if you look at the cost, it would involve to bring in another pipeline for what is going to be an outdated fuel and outdated technology. Instead, take that money and apply it to conservation, incentivizing homeowners, incentivizing businesses to rehab their buildings and use less energy, and incentivizing new projects, because these are big projects, to make use of renewables such as geothermal with heat pumps. That's going to have to be, I think there'll have to be some incentives. Hopefully the state will get involved. The state has laudable goals for going fossil-free, and I think here's a real opportunity to get the ball rolling in that.
To receive this news like a kind of a bolt out of the blue really is, again, I underline the word potential, potentially very, very problematic. What we need is either some modification of the terms of the moratorium so that it more realistically aligns with the need of construction, and/or a clear explanation of the engineering and financial instruments through which alternative means of heating large projects can be identified, or all of these things combined with a healthy dose of state assistance in order to close whatever financial gap may be necessary in order to make these alternatives viable.
You know, coming from the business world, you plan. You do a 1-year plan, you do a 3-year plan, you do a 5-year plan. They had to see this coming. You can't, in a month, put this on someone and say, no more hookups after March 15. It will be devastating to the commercial development in Lower Westchester County. Not only that, to homeowners that we have. You know, a lot of homeowners are converting from oil to gas, you know, trying to move up that curve. We know that there are other options. For example, last Thursday they talked about using heat pumps. A heat pump's $40,000. There's probably a $20,000 that you can get in incentives from the state, but still it costs you $20,000. We all want to get to renewable energy sources, but we have to have a thoughtful and well thought out way of getting there.
And John, the whole news conference ran about 40 minutes or so, and toward the end, when Latimer took the podium again for questions, you had a couple for him.
Yes, they were on my mind because it seemed to be two of the biggest questions in the room, and I asked them thusly. Where is the Public Service Commission on their decision on what discipline they're going to give NYSEG and Con Ed for their poor performance last spring?
I don't know that I can answer that question at this point. I don't know if any of us can. So I would say, John, we'll hold that in abeyance until we have a more substantive conversation with PSC, which is coming, and hopefully within the next week or so we'll give you an intelligent answer on. I know David Buchwald with United Westchester has been the point response person on that. We have another meeting coming up with NYSEG because the general sense is that NYSEG has not responded as responsibly to the concerns that were raised after last year's crisis. We did, if you recall, have a press conference with Con Edison late last year in which they indicated certain things that they were doing in terms of equipment and manpower deployment that they felt would better deliver on it. Now, we are here, on February 4th. Our 400th day in office, by the way, as a new administration. And so far, cross fingers, we haven't had the kind of test of the electrical grid system yet, and hopefully we don't have it at all, but to see how those changes have responded to it. But for more detailed answer, we'll make it a point to follow up, and we'll address that when we can.
Do you support the price rate increase?
We're going through a review of the price situation like that. Nobody wants to pay more for anything, so the first reaction is I don't want to pay more for anything. But we're going to have to review it as everybody else does and determine, as you or somebody else asked before, what are we getting for the additional money? But that's not part of this discussion, and that will play out over a much longer time frame. But we'll get back to you on that once we have a sense of what we want to do.
Right. Now, I asked Con Edison whether the moratorium that the county wants to delay is firm, and they confirmed that it is indeed firm. They're not changing the dates. And in fact, I talked with the Public Service Commission yesterday, and their press officer referred me to told me about the public hearing that's being held Wednesday to gather comment, and that there's going to be a committee looking into this and having a report by July the 1st. So natural, but they didn't say that the moratorium was going to be pushed back. So I checked with Con Ed this morning, and Bob McKee of Con Ed said, no, it's still firm. It's in effect. It will start. So what is the point of having a hearing and gathering comment if the moratorium is going to still be in effect?
Well,
it's an interesting question.
That's the process they have to go through.
Yes.
Keep in mind that Con Ed wants more money. They want a price increase, so so they're going to have to do hearings on that anyway. So.
Now, what's interesting is that just in the last 2 weeks up in Rhode Island, we had an example of what happens when demand exceeds supply. There were 10,000 people were without electricity because of the Algonquin pipeline that comes across from the north had a problem. Too much demand and a couple of glitches, and 10,000 people had to be shut off, and it's 2 weeks now putting them back because they have to do the gas thing one at a time. Can you imagine if that happened in Westchester? It's a very interesting problem. And right now, we look forward to the hearing and to see how this develops. And Governor Cuomo came in.
Yeah, Monday was a good day for news conferences.
Yes.
Cuomo and State Controller Tom DiNapoli and Budget Director Robert Mujica held a news conference in Albany on Monday at which they announced that the state experienced a drop in income tax collections during December and January to the tune of $2.3 billion. Now, Cuomo has proposed a $175 billion budget for 2020. Now, they blame the drop on SALT, part of the Trump tax bill, which the Republican-controlled House and Senate passed last year. Now, SALT puts a cap on the federal income tax deductions you can take for state and local taxes that we pay. The SALT changes mean residents of states with higher state and local taxes have less to deduct when doing their federal tax returns, and that results in a higher adjusted gross income. Now, a higher adjusted gross income means a higher number on which your federal tax burden is based, even though you're not receiving any additional income. Cuomo said that the Trump tax bill's SALT policy is an economic civil war that helps red Republican-controlled states at the expense of blue Democratic-controlled states. Quote, "We are now seeing the potentially devastating effect of it in the form of significantly lower tax receipts," Cuomo said. First Cuomo, then DiNapoli, then Mujica.
If your political goal is to help Republican states and hurt Democratic states, this is exactly the way they do it. You now have a Democratic Congress. I hope they understand this. I hope they understand the urgency, and I hope they address it. If I was a member of the Democratic Congress, I would say no budget is passed until you right this wrong. This was ham-handed. It was done by a president who controlled the Senate and the House, and the Democrats had no voice. Now that the Democrats are back at the table, this would be number one on my agenda, because this literally restructures the economy. And if you don't change it, you're going to do permanent damage.
This is the most serious revenue shock that the state has faced in many years. We can't say that enough or emphasize that enough. That $2.3 billion figure, frankly, Governor, I think could get worse before it gets better, based on the numbers as we see them. And I think the message really is a word of caution. Recognizing that this is a reality and a problem is a way for us to get ahead of it. And I think it would be fair to say that there certainly is time as part of the budget process for us to manage the reality of what these numbers are. If you are an upper income New Yorker, many people already have a second residence, and very easy for you to just change your legal status. And of course, Governor, like you, I'm concerned about those neighbors of mine on Long Island that don't necessarily have that second place already, and they can't just flip somewhere else. So these impacts will really affect middle-class New Yorkers in a significant way as well.
What's different this year than any other years, this is the first year that SALT deduction or the SALT cap was imposed. So as a result of that, what we're seeing is there is definitely a change in behavior by high-income individuals who have changed their behavior and did not make estimated payments at the end of December and in the beginning of January. That beginning of January period, we saw a decline of 94% in early January. By January 15th, that had gone down to about a 55% decline. But we're still seeing that decline.
Hang on to your wallets, folks.
Yes, but you notice a much calmer approach by the governor
Then
in
what?
this than some of his previous complaints about policies towards New York. Now, I just want to mention a couple of late developments on the power situation. The PSC has approved $223 million for Con Ed to proceed with improvements to save gas. And what they plan to do in Westchester, they are ground source heat pumps at 8,800 single-family residents in Westchester, air source heat pumps at over 1,000 small and mid-sized multi-family buildings, apartments, that currently use fuel oil for heating in the Bronx and other areas of the company's natural gas service territory. And 3, heat pumps to preheat boiler return water at more than 1,000 small commercial and large residential facilities throughout the company's natural gas service territory. And that's what we can look forward to. What towns they will be, and city and areas, we don't know yet. This just came out yesterday afternoon. And now, we had a State of the Union. Oh, we had the televising of People to Be Heard. Here's a shot of the mayor, if we can have that shot. That's how he looked. He really looks like he's ready for a talk show host situation down there in that photo right off the screen. It was basically a lot of talk about the North Broadway development and protests about the contaminated fill there, but the mayor just held his own. He answered questions. He stated policies. If that's the way this is going to be, I really like it because it really gets issues out there.
Well, there was some concern way back when that people would turn it into a circus. And that was the logic that was given for not televising
Absolutely. Right there.
the citizens to be heard section a half hour before the actual council meeting begins. So we'll have to see if decorum is maintained and people get up and say what they want to say, and not turn the whole thing into a circus. Fine. And if it's turned into a circus, then who knows what could happen. We have enough circuses in this country.
Speaking
now,
of
don't we?
circuses, there was a State of the Union message.
Well, aside from the State of the Union, what we are seeing unfold right now is something that could be possibly the biggest story of the year, if not the biggest story of a decade, and that is the story that involves multi-billionaire Jeff Bezos, founder of Amazon and owner of Trump's media enemy, The Washington Post, disclosing that Trump's good friend and political ally, David Pecker, whose company AMI publishes the National Enquirer and U.S. magazine, Us Magazine, attempted to blackmail and extort him to stop investigating AMI and the Enquirer. The Enquirer published Bezos's private emails about an affair he was having. And so Bezos started an investigation of the Enquirer to try to find out how did they get his private emails. Well, Bezos now himself has published emails sent to him by AMI's lawyer, which threatened to publish intimate photos of Bezos and his girlfriend unless Bezos stopped investigating AMI and the National Enquirer. And both Bezos and his investigator made public statements saying that nothing that AMI and the Enquirer did was politically motivated, which many believe really means designed to help Donald Trump or the Saudi prince who's been helping Trump and his son Kushner get millions in Saudi money, and was involved in the murder of Washington Post columnist Jamal Khashoggi. Pecker and AMI and the Enquirer already have admitted to violating federal law and have an agreement to cooperate with the federal government in the investigations of the Trump campaign. So if the Southern District of New York prosecutors want to ask Pecker, AMI, and the Enquirer questions about the Bezos matter, they have to answer or risk having that agreement torn up, which would then place them in legal jeopardy with the federal government. One of the big questions, how did the Enquirer get hold of Bezos's private emails? Did the Russians hack Bezos just the way they hacked Hillary Clinton and stole her emails? And is hacking Bezos something Trump asked Vladimir Putin to do during one of their private meetings, which Trump kept everyone out of and made sure there was no record of what he and Putin were talking about? Stay tuned for, as I said, what will certainly be one of, if not the biggest stories of the year and maybe the decade.
If the investigation continues.
It will continue.
Yes, right.
The House is beginning to work on obtaining President Trump's tax returns. Remember how Trump continuously promised he'd release his tax returns as soon as the IRS was finished auditing them? And remember how he then changed his story and said he'd never release them? Well, Congress has the authority to obtain them and to release them. The only catch, they have to demonstrate that it's not being done for a political purpose. They would have to show that it's done for a higher purpose, such as showing the American public that the president is a crook and acting as a foreign agent, laundering mob money. So that clearly would not be a political purpose. It would be for the good of the institutions of government, good for the nation, and good for the world. President Trump began his State of the Union message by cutting off House Speaker Nancy Pelosi from giving the usual time-honored traditional introduction. Members of the Congress, I have the high privilege and distinct honor of presenting to you the President of the United States. Not only was his rudeness an insult to every American who cherishes the traditions of our republic, but it was something you'd expect from an immature child. Then he began his speech by telling the enormous lie that he wanted to promote togetherness and cooperation, a lie which quickly became apparent when he then threatened Congress, something which historians say has never happened before in a State of the Union address. He threatened to block everything Congress did unless there's an end to the investigations into his and his family's possible criminal activity, conspiracy with Russia in the 2016 election, and undermining of the Constitution, and more. Trump's acting Attorney General, Matthew Whitaker, is testifying on Capitol Hill as we're recording this program. This is Friday morning. There had been doubt as to whether he would show up, defying the House Judiciary Committee, so Congressman Gerald Nadler of New York obtained a subpoena to be served on Whitaker if he didn't show up, but he did, and he's testifying. Special counsel Robert Mueller's office is alleging former Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort continued to work for Russians and the Ukrainians after his 2017 indictment, according to a redacted transcript from Manafort's hearing with federal prosecutors, which was filed in court on Monday. The hearing focused on whether Manafort breached his plea agreement by lying to investigators, including about his meetings with Konstantin Kilimnik, who is suspected of having ties to Russian intelligence. During a House hearing on gun violence, Trump supporter Matt Gaetz, Republican of Florida, said illegal immigration, not guns, is a major factor behind acts of public violence that have plagued the nation over the past 2 decades, and a wall between the U.S. and Mexico would keep a lot of the shootings in this country from happening. Well, Manny Oliver, whose son was killed in the shooting at Parkland High School in Florida, jumped to his feet and took issue with Congressman Gaetz. Gaetz called for the shooting victim's father to be thrown out of the hearing. But other congressmen came to the defense of the father, resulting in a standing ovation from those in the hearing room, and the father was not thrown out. In the State of the Union speech, Trump called for a push to eliminate the disease AIDS. But this is just one more Trump lie about what he wants to do, because his administration has been undercutting medical efforts to treat AIDS patients and has been cutting funding for medical research, including AIDS research. What is likely, however, is that if enough people rally behind a Trump administration push against AIDS, he'll move ahead with promoting the wishes of his right-wing fundamentalist Christian supporters to make homosexuality illegal, using the discredited idea that if you eliminate homosexual conduct, you also eliminate transmission of the AIDS virus. John?
Right. Well, I just want to remind everybody that that public hearing on the moratorium takes place Wednesday at 2 p.m. and 6 p.m. at the White Plains Library, 100 Martine Avenue. Public statement hearings are 2:30 and 6:30 p.m. at the same location. And a new show opened up last week at the Westchester Broadway Theater. It was Ain't Misbehavin'. And it's a great show. The second act is terrific. I heard the words sung to Black and Blue for the first time by the company, and it is a very moving song. You rarely hear the words.
What's interesting about this production over at the Westchester Broadway Theater was directed at the theater by Richard Maltby.
Yes.
Who is the creator of the show and who directed it on Broadway and who has a history in Broadway theater, in music.
It's a great show.
Records, and he was there for the press night.
And we lost a baseball great just yesterday. Frank Robinson, the great Frank Robinson, died in Los Angeles. He'll never be forgotten. And I saw him play, and you always respected him, even though he was playing against you. Frank Robinson. Great ball player. John Bailey, Peter Katz, good night for White Plains Week.
This has been White Plains Week, news and commentary about White Plains, Westchester, and the world. The views and opinions expressed on this program were solely those of the participants. White Plains Week, produced by White Plains Citizen Net Reporter, and presented on Optimum Cable Channel 76 and Verizon Fios Channel 45. You may view White Plains Week anytime on the internet at whiteplainsweek.com, youtube.com, and wpcommunitymedia.org. For White Plains Week, this is Peter Katz speaking.